Well, I'm standing here with Jonathan Powell, who's a negotiator and founder of Intermediate and a former chief of staff to Tony Blair. And he's just participated in the seminar Time to Talk to the Terrorists at Sverige. And the opposite of talking to the terrorists would be to confront them or police them in some way. Have you seen any evidence or examples where policing terrorists has been successful?
Hugh Ord, who was the chief constable in Northern Ireland at the time when the Troubles ended and we made transition to peace, said he knows no example anywhere of the terrorist problem being policed out. And if you look back at history, that seems to be right. The one example that's quoted is Sri Lanka. People say, particularly the Rajapaksas who conducted this, defeated terrorism by military means. It worked like that. Firstly, Prabha Khan, the leader of the Tamil Tigers, was thought to be a military genius. In the end, he turned out to be a military fool. He could have fought a guerrilla campaign, but instead he fought a conventional campaign against a conventional army and was defeated. Secondly, the method used by the Sri Lankan government to massacre numbers of civilians. And thirdly, they didn't address the political question. They never addressed the question of Tamil rights and Tamil desire for autonomy. And because they failed to address that, they eventually got thrown out of government, and now the new government is addressing the political question. So I don't believe if the terrorist group enjoys real political support, you're going to find any solution other than a political one.
And a terrorist is a widely used label, and it has a really broad spectrum of groups collected under it. Do you think there's a common denominator in these groups to be used when negotiating with them, or is every situation just unique and you can't really do that?
You're right, the word terrorist isn't actually very helpful. Terror is a tactic. It can be used by governments, it can be used by individuals, it can be used by armed groups. It doesn't define a group. You might ask, why therefore did I call my book Talking to Terrorists? And the answer is because I wanted to call it Talking to Non-Straight Armed Groups Who Use Terror for Political Purposes, and my editor said it wouldn't fit on the cover. But terrorism is usually used as an insult, as a way of avoiding talking to people. People call other groups terrorists, they put them on lists. All that does is stops you talking to them. The Americans, for example, put the Nepalese Maoists on a list of terrorists. It meant they couldn't talk to them, but didn't stop them winning the election, and then the Americans had to talk to them.
That's a really interesting answer, actually. But you walk a really fine line deciding on when to engage within the groups. And how do you avoid delaying talks with them, which may save unnecessary casualties? Like, how do you know when you've waited too long? And are there any positives of waiting them out?
I distinguish between talking to terrorists and negotiating. It seems to me it's always right to talk to them. As early as possible, you should open up a channel so you can understand them better and they can understand how they're seen in the outside world. Many of these groups live in a sort of ghetto, either a physical ghetto or a metaphorical ghetto. They don't talk to outsiders, they only talk to themselves. The more you can get them to talk to outsiders, the more chance you stand of making progress. So I think you should open up a channel very early on. In the case of the British government, we opened a channel to the IRA in 1972, and we didn't have our negotiations till the 1990s. It takes a long time to have that channel. Talking, negotiating, only seems to work in certain circumstances, and those are where you have a mutually hurting stalemate, and that means not just that both sides are tired of fighting, but they realise they're not going to succeed, and they are suffering, and they feel that they need to go into negotiation, and when you have political leadership. So if you look at the Middle East, for example, at the moment, both of those are lacking. Since the building of the wall, there's no suffering on one side. There isn't the suicide bombs there was before, so people are not inclined to talk, and there is not strong leadership on both sides, therefore you don't get to a solution. You need both of those in place before the negotiations will succeed. That's three.
Very good. But times are changing really quickly, and technology changes. And how they communicate, these groups of armed forces, how they communicate changes. Do you think social media and new platforms of communication alters the way that we should engage them or talk to them?
That's an interesting question. It is clear that terrorist groups take advantage of changes in technology, and so do governments. You know, some governments think they can defeat terrorism by drones and by jungle penetrating radar, but you can't. There's simply an arms race from that point of view. And the same thing applies to social media. So social media makes it easier for groups to organise without being found out, but it equally makes it easier for governments to follow them because they can trace them electronically. A similar thing happened just after the First World War. Historians write about this. There was a similar transformation of technology at that time. We got the telegraph, we got steamships, and suddenly terrorist groups were communicating around the world. The anarchists who were throwing bombs in Chicago were communicating with those who were throwing bombs in Rome. So this isn't a new thing. Terrorists use technology in different ways. It doesn't provide a solution for us. It simply changes the nature of the conflict for a short period of time.
Well, that was all my questions. So I would like to say a big thank you for taking the time to participate in this little chat. And we're really thankful for it.
Thank you very much.